Who's ready for a Pontiac intake manifold hack? Literally, I'm gonna hack this thing into two pieces. Stick around and we'll talk about why cutting your Pontiac intake manifold into two pieces is actually not that bad of an idea. So today, I've got my intake manifold up here, and we're working on separating the water crossover from the rest of the intake manifold. Now, why would I want to do this? Well, let's take a closer look at a Pontiac intake manifold. So this is a Performer RPM for a Pontiac. Now, you'll notice, first off, as compared to, a Chevy manifold, there's no hole back here for the distributor. The distributor does not go through the intake manifold. It doesn't even go through the valley pan. It's directly on top of the block. So you don't have to remove the distributor to remove the intake manifold. Normally, you would still have to drain your cooling system, blow the water crossover, which I had to do here, but we're going to try to solve that. So what I'm working on today is I'm going to separate our water crossover, and then that can be bolted and stay down, and then that would allow us in the future to make quick intake manifold changes. You can do this for a multitude of reasons. If you are a race engine trying to squeeze every last horsepower out of your car, you could do some really fine port adjustment to it and just make sure you're dead centered on those intake ports. But the big advantage is you can just change intake manifolds. You can dyno test multiple manifolds back to back to back without messing with your water crossover and cooling, etc. Now again, this is an Edelbrock RPM, and you see that this guy has a big a big aluminum plate running across one side. So just by happenstance, I have pretty much the most difficult Pontiac manifold to do this to. In fact, a lot of higher end Pontiac manifolds are actually sold without that water crossover, and you have to pay extra to get it. So if I just separate this and bolt it on, if I want to buy, a more race oriented single plane down the road, I don't have to spend that extra money for one with the water crossover because I've already separated this, and I can just pop that new sucker on without having to deal with coolant. Now let's take a look at a different Pontiac manifold real quick. This is a Holly Street Dominator. This looks very similar to kind of standard cast intakes. But if you look, we don't have that big plate here. You have your two intake runners, and you have a little thin guy in the middle. So this would be much easier to do the same thing to. Again, I chose pretty much the hardest manifold to do this job on, but it's the one that I have, and that one is port match to my heads, which flow about 305 CFM. Now I want to show you how I'm going to do this. You don't have to do this the same way, but if you look, you can see I've already drilled some holes along with some magic marker that I've ran along this. The reason I drilled those holes is because that, without starting a cut, lets us get in here and see where it comes out on the other side. Whereas if I had just started cutting, I might have found that I was in a dangerous area, and we're trying to avoid that. So using a small drill bit, that allows me to make a much smaller and safer cut. It has the added benefit, instead of trying to cut long lines, I'm making a series of small cuts in between those drilled holes. So you can do this with a number of different tools. A bandsaw would be the best. It's one of the few tools around here that I don't have. So I'm going to use my pneumatic powered jigsaw and see how that goes. I might start the side cuts with a hacksaw just so my jigsaw doesn't try to walk on me when I initially make the cut. So I might just give myself an indentation. Similarly, when I drilled my holes, I took my center punch here and just poked this where I wanted it so the drill didn't walk off on me, and I more or less drilled where I intended to. When you do this, I talked to other Pontiac guys who've done it. They said you really want to stick closer to the water port side and leave yourself more room on the intake side, which makes sense. You don't want to hurt your manifold. If you were to make a mistake and get into your water crossover, you can actually buy these separate. So while it wouldn't be ideal, if you're going to make a mistake, make it on this side. All right, let's get started here. Ideally, I'd like to start with a new blade, but I don't have one. So we're going to work with what we got. Safety first. If you do this with a carbide blade, like with a cutoff wheel, totally viable. You could do that. I would start with a new wheel that hasn't been used, and then once you're done with it, I would either mark it as aluminum only and put it in your drawer, or throw it away. You really don't want to be cutting aluminum and then go back to cutting steel. It's a bad idea. Bad things can happen. Just try to stay straight. I might have to go try to find a new blade because that was cutting extraordinarily slow. Yeah, we nicked it by about a 1/16 of an inch there. Let me go see if I can find a new blade. Okay, we're back. Went to Lowe's, grabbed some new Bosch jigsaw blades. They're a little bit shorter than I want, and I was really looking for something that was specifically designed for aluminum. Came up kind of blank there, but I did get some new metal blades, and I got multiple so I can switch. What I actually did here off camera is I drilled a few more holes in the flange. The flange is what's taking forever, and I tested my blade on this first cut. You know, it's about 3/8 of an inch, and it does take a while, so I was warned that this could be a bit more of a slog than you think, especially with this type of intake. And if I had a bandsaw, I'd probably go faster, but I don't. Needs must and all that. So we're going to have to fight to get through the flange. That's the thickest part. The rest of this will go faster. One thing you can do, like I said, is I went through and drilled more holes, so you're making shorter cuts. You drill holes pretty quickly. The cuts take a while, so you could really Swiss cheese this thing, and it might make it less effort on your part. Same thing over here. Even though this probably won't be as bad because it's much thinner aluminum, I'm still probably going to go through and zap a bunch more holes in down the line, and then especially over here on the other flange to make this go faster. I'm also going to try to use a little bit of lubrication, and I've got my garbage can under here for chips. Let's give it a shot. I'll put you in fast forward so you don't have to watch me sitting here struggling for, 10, 20 minutes. Unfortunately, my air compressor is on. I don't know how well you can see that, but we've got our one flange separated. Now we're gonna move on to the other side. This I don't think should be too bad. This is gonna be a bear, especially down here at the bottom where it's thickest, but we'll get through it. And boom goes the dynamite. Worked. I gotta tell you, if you're doing it this way with a jigsaw or maybe even with a carbide blade or something else, this is the way to go. Like, if you don't have a bandsaw and if you have to do this with an RPM manifold where you're just doing a ton of cutting, drilling holes so you only have to make small cuts with the actual saw went a long way. So now, because we don't want to make it this ugly, I'm a hack, I'm not that much of a hack, I'm going to come in here with a nice fresh flap disc and clean all this up. And I'm not going to make it dead flat, but it's going to be good enough unless you're looking at it with, a magnifying glass. That's next. All right, this is going to take a while. I'm not going to film the whole thing. This is just a 36 grit sanding disc that I had laying nearby. So I'm going to try that first. We're just going to try to get it so it's not so serrated. So here we are, as finished as my product is going to get here. I went ahead and threw some Duplicolor 67 to 70, I think, Pontiac blue metallic on this. Came out pretty well. So unfortunately, getting my head back from the machine shop with the repair complete is taking a little bit longer than I had hoped, but good work doesn't always come quickly. But I'm still going to be able to show you, what this looks like and why it's not a bad idea. So as you can see, this head is still missing here, but now that we're separated, we could now take this intake off without opening up our cooling system or even our distributor. I mean, you can see I still have my distributor stabbed in back here, even with the head all the way off. So when the head comes back, I'm going to be able to throw that on, set the preload on my hydraulic roller lifters, which are covered up here under the valley pan, and then essentially continue on with where the timing was before we ever took it apart. So as soon as I put this back together, it should bark right off because the timing is exactly where we left it before. Now, getting you in a little bit closer, beauty's kind of in the eye of the beholder here. You could go in and cut this all the way up and around and make it maybe look a little bit better, but I'm totally happy with the way this came out. And now if I have an intake leak or if I just want to swap intakes, which I think I might, and do some track testing back to back, I can now do that pretty easily. Now, there are some downsides to this as well, notably value. If you have an intact RPM like mine was and you cut it in half, if you turn around and try to sell it, you are going to lose some value on it. It's not going to be that much because a lot of people who are into performance Pontiacs, do this anyway. I'm definitely not the first person who's ever done this, but it's just something to be aware of. If you have a nice intake manifold and you cut it in half and you determine later on you're going to try to sell it, you're going to be giving up a little bit of value there. The other thing, if you're into stock restorations, this is not going to look stock. That's not me. If you're watching my channel, it's probably not you either. More power to you if it is, but this is clearly not going to look like a stock manifold anymore once you cut it in half. If you have a different design, I mean, notably, if you have a stock iron manifold, you probably could cut those lines really thinly with like a bandsaw, and I don't think anybody would ever notice unless they looked at it under a microscope. But hey, those of us who are in the Pontiac world, we don't often get a lot of advantages, and this is an advantage of the Pontiac design. By separating your water crossover, you can now quick change intake manifolds without touching timing or your cooling system, and there's not a lot of other engine designs that can say that. So that's going to do it. Thanks for watching. Please like and subscribe if you haven't already. Be on the lookout for a new video where we put this old girl back together and hopefully get it back on the road really soon. We'll see you next time.